Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan, MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war, I guess, breaking news update. There was news about this last night. There's more news coming out today because the documents have now been released or leaked or whatever concerning the minerals deal, the rare earth deal, whatever you want to call it, between the US and Ukraine that started off being outright outrageous extortion. But there's been some wheeling and dealing, and it could well be that this is just it. I mean, I think it's self-evidently a lot better for Ukraine than it was. Whether it's still a form of extortion, I think is up for debate. It needs to go through the Verkhovna Rada, I believe, to be ratified. And yeah, it is. Well, we'll go through the details. The long and short of it is, according to the Ukrainian Review, creation of investment fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Ukraine and the US will manage this fund on an equal footing. Ukraine will transfer 50% of revenues from the monetization of all natural resources to the fund, oil, gas, minerals, infrastructure. The US, for its part, will also make appropriate contributions. The fund will invest these funds in the development of Ukraine. So it's very different than the US, as it was originally stated, getting $500 billion of value extracted from the earth of Ukraine, if you like. So that's interesting. Okay, No Report says Ukraine and US have finalised an agreement on rare earth investment fund for Ukraine's reconstruction. The fund will be jointly managed by both countries. Agreement is legally binding, and it also directly linked to security guarantees. Now, this is the key point here, because there's still, I think, a lack of clarity on whether security guarantees have been attached to this. Today, the Ukrainian government will review the text. Okay, let's go through a little bit more of it. We're going to look at some of the text in a second. Just a few more minor points here, or actually major points. No Reports then says Ukraine's agreement with the US on minerals aligns with earlier EU deals, says Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. The pact respects Ukraine's European integration goals and avoids conflicts with EU commitments. That's important and certainly very interesting. Analyst says, okay, mineral deal agreed. Ukraine has negotiated more agreeable terms in a minerals deal with the US, according to Ukrainian sources. Zelensky will reportedly fly to Washington on Friday to sign a deal. It was Zelensky who came up with it, and I can only hope he's managed to get something out of it for the future, and it's not just paying for the past. It's already bad enough that Ukraine had to stoop to this. There are some elements that make it look like actually Ukraine have turned this deal around to be a much more beneficial deal for Ukraine. And that shows the strength of Zelensky as a negotiator, and the idea that, you know, the US will come up with these bombastic ideas, but you need to be strong in the face of them, and they will back down. That appears to be it's definitely something that many have said about Donald Trump himself personally, that he often just back downs to strong retorts. There is some text here from, I think, RBC. This is Tim White saying that Ukraine's Prime Minister gave more details about the mineral deal with the US. They now want it to be known as the, quote, agreement establishing the terms and conditions of the Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. Quite a mouthful there. And again, Shmyhal saying that there are implied security guarantees for Ukraine. That's very different from legally binding security guarantees. That would be a worry for me. Okay, so RBK says, Ukraine and the United States have effectively finalised the rare earths agreement. As of today, the agreement is called the Agreement Establishing the Terms and Conditions of the Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. The RBC Ukraine reports that Prime Minister of Ukraine, Shmyhal, said this during a national telethon. Quote, we have actually developed the final version. As of today, the agreement is called, aforementioned. In fact, this is a preliminary agreement that will have legal force. It provides for the creation of an investment fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine, which Ukraine and the United States will jointly manage and fill, Shmyhal has said. According to him, the agreement is directly related to Ukraine's security guarantees, and neither President Zelensky nor the Cabinet of Ministers will consider it without this. So that security guarantees is very important there. Quote, the preamble of the agreement very clearly states that, taking into account the desire of the American people to invest together with Ukraine in a free, sovereign and secure state, this is the beginning of the agreement. I quote the text directly, and this is important for us to understand the purpose for which it was concluded. The security nature of this agreement is the number one priority for our country, government and president, the Prime Minister emphasised. Really important here, I think. It shows that security guarantees are going to be at the forefront of this. So it's going to be interesting to see how that manifests, in the final agreement, and how legally binding that's going to be and how explicit that also is. Anyway, this article continues. The agreement contains a reference to the Budapest Memorandum, which emphasizes Ukraine's contribution to international security by giving up the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. That's really interesting because I think this has not been focused upon nearly enough. The Ukrainians signed the Budapest Memorandum with these other countries, the US being one of them, to legally be responsible for supplying security to Ukraine. And one of those signatories has attacked Ukraine, but it's therefore up to the other signatories to be committed, contractually, to supplying assistance to Ukraine. Now, the US seems to have gone back on that idea, and I wonder whether they've used that as leverage here to express that actually you are legally bound to assist us. It is expected the document will be considered by the Ukrainian government and finally agreed upon during negotiations between the presidents of Ukraine and the US. Key provisions of the agreement on rare earth metals are creation of an investment fund. Ukraine and the US will manage the Ukrainian Reconstruction Fund on an equal footing. Linkage to security guarantees. The agreement is part of the security architecture, including support for Ukraine's accession to NATO or alternative guarantees. Fund financing. 50% of Ukraine's revenues from rents or licenses for minerals and dividends on infrastructure facilities will be directed to the fund. Joint contributions from the US and Ukraine funds will be invested in the recovery economy and security of Ukraine. Recognition of Ukraine's contribution to international security. Mention of the abandonment of the nuclear arsenal, reference to the Budapest Memorandum. And the fund is managed jointly by the governments of Ukraine and the United States. And that's Denis Shmyhal there. It's going to be fascinating to see the finer details of this and to see whether Zelensky, as it appears, has got the US to really back down. We heard last night that the US has backed down on its most stringent demands. Well, that appears to be very much the case from what I'm hearing, at least. But of course, there's an awful lot of detail still lacking here. Sorry if you hear any background noise, my garage door is being fixed. And this is not to do with the minerals deal, but I'll throw this in as another kind of deal bit of news. Although it's not actual news, this is like some speculation here. A theory from a Finnish political scientist, Jussi Lassila. Trump may demand the exclusion of Finland and Sweden from NATO in the interest of an agreement with the Kremlin. And this is exactly, says Jürgen Naudit, exactly what one of Moscow's main demands looks like. The return of NATO to 1997 borders, and this could become a key element in negotiations between the US and the Russian Federation. I wonder whether you would then just get a deconstruction of NATO and a reconstruction of something that looks like a European NATO without the US, with the idea that the US has become this unreliable ally. And it might be that Russia would have nothing to say to that because it would be a completely new security alliance. And, they can't complain about NATO expansion when it's not NATO. It's some other new thing that's been put in place right now, and you have to deal with it. We'll have to see how that plays out. But let me know what you think about everything going on with regard to this, what was originally very much an example of racketeering, protection racketeering and extortion, and now looks rather like a bipartisan deal that also doesn't look like massive repayment for aid that's gone into Ukraine, and therefore possibly and hopefully can't be used as justification for other nations to demand repayment for aid that has gone to Ukraine. Because that, I think, would have just been, Ukraine wouldn't have been able to deal with that. That would have been a bit a hard no on the deal, because they would just be opening themselves up to all these other nations, like we've heard from Slovakia already, to say similar things and do similar things as the US initially set out to do. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon.